Hello, everybody, and welcome to I believe this is the fourth annual Ruth Chaffetz Memorial Lecture. I started doing this 4 years ago, even though it's my mother's 6-year site last week, because after I wrote my book, Organized Jewish Life, I decided that I help people, organize around mitzvot, but this way we could discuss specific mitzvot and how to understand them and how to prepare ourselves for them, because what I find is a lot of times the application of how we can actually apply a mitzvah is sometimes challenging, and how we can prepare ourselves for mitzvot is sometimes challenging when we haven't studied about it or we don't really know about it. So this year we have the pleasure and honor of having Rabbi David Rosenbaum with us. He was my mother's rabbi, is still my father's rabbi, and he is the rabbi of Kilat Young Israel Shomrei Emunah. He has played an extensive role in the broader Greater Washington Orthodox Jewish community, serving among other positions as president of the Vad HaRabbanim of Greater Washington from 2013 to 2015. Rabbi Rosenbaum is currently the Gidden administrator for the Vad, which is why he is the perfect person to speak to us on the topic of halacha and divorce. He also acts as a halachic resource for a number of organizations in the community. Before coming to Young Israel Shomrei Emunah, Rabbi Rosenbaum was the rabbi of Am Torah congregation in Bethesda, Maryland. His first love was Jewish education, and he taught Judaic studies at the Yeshiva of Greater Washington, which, in case you didn't know, is also my alma mater. And he taught for levels ranging from 7th grade to post-high school in the boys and girls yeshiva, as well as the Yeshiva Gedola for 10 years. He still enjoys numerous opportunities to connect to the youth of the Silver Spring, Ket Mill greater community, and included in Wyatt Young Israel Shomrei Emunah's popular door-to-door program. The rabbi lives in Ket Mill with his wife and his children, and we are really grateful that he is here joining us today so we can talk about this important mitzvah. Rabbi, why don't you explain to us the mitzvah of divorce, and then I have some questions that I'd like to ask you, and we'll go from there.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I just have to say, with your indulgence, just a word or two. I think it's an honor to participate in this. It's an honor to participate. I've very, very, very fond memories of Ruth Chaffetz, particularly meaningful and hard discussions we had near the end of her life. And I, I think it's relatively unique to have such meaningful and thoughtful interaction at such a difficult time in someone's life. And I'll always remember that. I'll always remember how she was as a very reflective and spiritual person at a very challenging time. And I also, with Hashem's help, will always remember how devoted you, Rebekah, and certainly your father, Richard, and the whole family were to her care at a very difficult time. And I think it's simply amazing how you keep on having such meaningful ways to mark her yahrzeit and do things in her memory. So a real honor to be on with you. Thank you very much. Thank
Well, I'm
you.
glad you're here. Thank you for.
Um, sure. Okay, so the Torah talks about a get. The Torah talks about the concept of a get. It's a pasuk in the Parak Chaf Dalet of Sefer Dvarim, chapter 24. Ki yikach ish isha uvahala, man marries a woman, v'haya lo simtzachem beinav. If she doesn't find favor in his eyes, ki matzavar bas davar, he finds something inappropriate with her, which there's a whole discussion about what that might mean. But the bottom line is, v'chasavla sefer krisos v'nasan biyada. He writes to her a document of divorce and places it in her hand, and because of that, they're divorced, and she is no longer part of his household. So get is a very real thing. Get is an important thing. Get is obviously a very painful thing, but it's important for people to know how to approach get. And I think it's very important for the general Jewish community to have a little bit of a perspective, because I think it can help us be supportive and approach things in an appropriate way. So happy to discuss.
Great. So can you, so what would classify as, or do we not want to get into the whole list of why he doesn't find favor with her? And how can a woman initiate a divorce?
Thank
That
you.
ever, because there
Yeah,
are qualifications that would allow a woman to ask for divorce.
absolutely, absolutely. And the bottom line is there's a very difficult to understand Mishnah and Maseches Gittin near the end of Maseches Gittin. There's a dispute between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai says a man could only initiate a divorce if his wife did something fundamentally inappropriate in terms of her sexual activity. In other words, that's a pretty strong thing that she was unfaithful. Beis Hillel says really to the other extreme. There's all kinds of discussion among commentators as to what exactly Beis Hillel means. But I think the bottom line is like living practically as Jews, but the focus is practical, right? That's what I heard from your introduction, Rebekah. So living practically as Jews, I think if people find that the marriage relationship is not working for them, there very much is a path forward. And I think practically speaking, in 2026, whether it be the husband or the wife finds that the marriage dynamic is not working, obviously, we encourage people to try to make it work and counseling, etc. And there are many wonderful examples of couples who went to counseling and really reconnected in a beautiful way and continue to have a beautiful marriage. But it's a very real thing, and the Torah lays it out very clearly that if it's not working for either party and they really don't see a path forward, divorce really is the correct way so that people can hopefully find a more appropriate partner in life, but even if not, so that people can live their life in a happy, fruitful, flourishing type of way. Um, it's very interesting. I get calls. I should be clear. You read the bio completely correctly, but I want to make sure the audience understands. It's extremely important when doing a get to make sure that there's someone not only extremely knowledgeable on all the intricacies of the halachas of get, but uh, nationally and internationally recognized in the rabbinic circles as such, because the worst thing would be if someone gets a get and then they have this document and 20 years from now, someone looks at it and says, who in the world is this person? I'm not going to recognize that get. So it's super important. I'm actually not what's called the Masader Gittin in Washington. Masader Gittin is really the halachic authority that certifies the get. We bring someone in from Baltimore to play that role. Rabbi Einemer Zichrono Livracha, the longtime Rabbi Marshall, did play that role. But I am really the administrator. When people want to get, they contact me. I kind of explain the process to them, and I kind of walk them through it. And I normally participate in the get itself as a member of the Beis Din, but just to clarify that, I get calls from women all the time, and they always want to know, like, I want to find out about the get, so now do I have to have my husband call? There's a very technical aspect of the get that has to be initiated by the husband. The only part of the get that has to be initiated by the husband, it actually is in the pasuk that we were reading before. So it says in the Torah that the way a get works is a husband writes the get to his wife. Um, the get is written on parchment. The get is written in the script of that a Sefer Torah is written in, and there are all kinds of halachos how to write the get. I assure you, the overwhelming majority of divorcing men in Jewish history had no idea how to write a get. And what happens is that the husband appoints a sofer, a scribe, to write the get on his behalf. So he needs to appoint the scribe. The wife may not appoint the scribe, because then it wouldn't be the scribe is working as the proxy of the husband. So that is where the husband has to initiate. But in terms of arranging the get, in terms of contacting the Beis Din, it's perfectly fine for the wife to be reaching out. I'll tell you, and if I'm wandering too far afield, just cut me off. That's
Well, no, my next question is to walk us through the get process. So what
okay,
happens
great.
from, so if we are going down that line, let's
Yeah,
go
yeah,
from start to finish.
yeah. Thank you. I'll tell you what I'm about to say. I'm sure varies on the Beis Din. I'll tell you the way we do it in the Washington area. I think a lot of people's perception of a get is there's this extremely uncomfortable exchange with the rabbis of the Beis Din and tell us your life story and why. And To be honest with you, that's not how we do it in our community. Obviously, a get should not be done in a flippant way. Um, if the get is if it is someone from the observant community, I normally will ask if they've discussed with their rabbi if this makes sense to go ahead with the get, and most of the time, by the way, when they call me, it's because the rabbi encouraged them to call me. But with their permission, I do normally just contact the rabbi and I just want to make sure it makes sense for us to be going ahead with them. If it's someone that I know myself, I can say, and I'm intimately aware of their situation, just as their own rabbi, I can, kind of discuss with them if it really makes sense. But the bottom line is, as long as the rabbi tells us that, yeah, it makes sense, and we really just go ahead with it. I actually emphasize to people that we're really here to just help them with the halachic procedure. We try to, people are going through enough pain in their lives right now as is. They don't need us to invade their personal stories. And so in any event, when at least the way it works for us, when either party contacts us and clarifies that they want to get, we need to make sure the other party is agreeable to participate. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later. What happens when the other party is not agreeable to participate? You really need the participation of both parties. It's a common misconception. The very unfortunate, very well-known stories about get refusal normally revolve around the husband refusing. It could work the other way, and it does sometimes work the other way, that the wife refuses to participate, and then it's still not a get. But in any event, assuming both parties are agreeable to participate, so what happens is we just find a mutually convenient time for the parties to come. We always give the parties a decision if they're okay with being face-to-face for the get or not. Sometimes it might just even be a logistical thing. You imagine the parents of young children. So if both of them are at the get at the same time, who's watching the kids if it's not a school day, or if it's not during school hours, whatever. So sometimes it's just really a logistical thing. Obviously, as you can imagine, sometimes it's an emotional thing. One or both parties really do not want to be face to face with the other person. Sometimes one of the parties doesn't even feel safe being face to face with the other person, which we've certainly had before as well. So if either party doesn't want to be face to face for the get, we arrange it with a proxy, which I can explain more in a moment. But the bottom line is we make a mutually convenient time for both parties to come in. I always tell people it strikes people as a little bizarre. The most personal question that happens in the get is people are asked all kinds of questions about names they go by, and even nicknames, which is very surprising to people. But the Gemara in Maseches Gittin talks about the great importance of there not being any question or doubt if this person indeed was supposed to be the recipient of the get. So let's say the person is known as, Beth, and the get doesn't refer to her as Beth in any way in the get. It could be that down the road someone will wonder if this is really her or if it was supposed to be someone else. So we use all kinds of names, much, much more than people had for their ksuba, at their wedding. We get that information, and then the husband literally goes through a script. He clarifies that he's doing the get of his own free will. Doesn't mean that he's excited about doing the get, but it means that he's decided this is what he's going to do. It's actually an interesting thing. It's only valid if the husband is willing to be doing it. So let's say the husband vowed he would do the get. We actually nullify the vow before proceeding, because if he's only doing it because he was compelled through vow, it's not valid either. So that's an interesting thing. So the husband clarifies he's doing it of his own free will. The beis din formally nullifies any vows he might have made with his permission. And then the husband formally appoints the sofer to write the get on his behalf. And there's another 2 members on the beis din who will serve as the witnesses on the get. Also a surprise, people assume that they signed the get. The parties don't sign the get. The get is signed by 2 witnesses who were certifying that the husband instructed that the get be given, and then witnesses watch the get be handed by the husband to the wife. So he appoints the 2 witnesses to sign the get, and then everybody sits tight because the sofer is, again, unlike a ksuba, the sofer is only allowed to write the get once he's been commissioned by the husband to do so.
So we can't do
Um,
that in advance.
can't do it in advance. That's what everybody wants to know. What are we
I'd be like,
waiting?
let's get it
Why
over as
can't
fast
we?
as we can.
Right, because, and it really does tie back to that pasuk that we mentioned before, because the Torah's model is that he writes the get to her. So the sofer is acting as the proxy of the husband. An interesting question that comes up is, can the husband virtually appoint the sofer? Because we were having this very lovely gathering on Zoom, and we're imparting all this
Right.
hopefully meaningful knowledge. Can the husband just get on Zoom and impart the sofer and appoint the sofer? And that certainly the mainstream approach is that's not really an option, because the husband has to appoint the sofer. The sofer has to be clear that the husband is saying it to him. The witnesses have to witness the appointment, and the standard halachic approach, there could be extreme situations, but the standard halachic approach is that it has to be in person. So the sofer could only get going once the husband personally appoints him. So that takes time, and that's the bulk of the get. That's the bulk of the time of the get, the sofer writing. Then the sofer writes through, and the sofer, along with the two other members of the Beis Din, read through the get to make sure there's no mistakes. And among the best of sofrim, because there's a little bit of a pressure here. They're trying to not keep everybody waiting. Among the best of sofrim, there are definitely mistakes. And sometimes the mistakes can be corrected, and sometimes the mistakes are not deal breakers in terms of the kashrus of the get. Sometimes the sofer has to write it all over again, which is, thank God, few and far between. But it happens. It's not that it never happens. Once that's all good, the witnesses sign the get. And then once literally the ink is fully dried, literally, the husband places the get in the wife's hands. There's a formula the husband says before doing it, just like there's a formula under the chuppah that the husband says before placing the ring on the wife's finger. I'll just let it ring, sorry.
Can't hear it.
And and then, oh great, and then the husband places the get in the wife's hands. Also the pasuk, by the way, it says v'nasan biyada, he places it in her hand. It's interesting, she raises it up to show that she clearly has it. She like tucks it in her pocket or under her arm, and she starts walking out with it to show that she clearly has it. And then, and this always surprises people, we actually take the get back at that point in time. And it's a little bit unnerving. Why in the world did you take the get back? So first of all, the get gets folded up. The get gets folded up. So the Beis Din just needs to double check that in the folding, there were no breaking of any letters that might have rendered the get invalid. But actually, this is standard policy around the world. The Beis Din holds on to the get. Now, why in the world does the Beis Din hold on to the get? I gave the example before. Let's say the woman's name is Beth. Let's say some wise guy takes a look at the get 10 years from then and says, "Oh, I would have spelled Beth differently. I don't think it's a valid get." So it's really for the protection of both parties. The
But she
Beis
gets
Din,
a receipt, right?
yes, the Beis Din gives both parties a document on the Beis Din stationery with the signatures of the members of the Beis Din certifying the get took place, and that's really the document that people need to hold on to. It's interesting. One of my colleagues likes to tell a story at the get that they were once involved with a get. No, they were once involved with someone getting married after divorce, and to present to the officiating rabbi or Beis Din or whatever it was that the person wanted to get remarried, they actually had the original get and they gave it to the Beis Din. And the officiating rabbi said, "What kind of crazy Beis Din gave you the get?" And that itself made the person wonder if this was even valid, because it's so not done. And then the whole get process, at least for our Beis Din, normally takes around an hour and a half. The person who writes the get for us is extremely skilled in terms of his proficiency, but also speed. I would imagine, if a person's not
Is
as
it a
fast
standard formula?
in terms
Like
of the text of the
yeah,
get itself.
the copy, is it standard?
Yes, absolutely. It's absolutely standard. The variation, and this is really sort of where you get sort of like the importance of the proficiency of whoever is the halachic authority. There's all kinds of questions about how to spell names and how to refer to names, and actually a big deal for a get has to do with naming the place that the get is taking place in. Again, very much unlike Exuba, it's a very halachically sensitive thing. For decades, the Gittin in the Greater Washington community, for example, happened in Washington, D.C. And then at some point, again, I mentioned before, Rebbe Gedalia Einer Zichrono Livracha, the decision was to move it to Silver Spring. And it was like he had to decide exactly how Silver Spring would be spelled for the get. And normally we refer to a body of water. You have to decide what body of water, but that obviously varies from get to get. There's also a date in the get. So the date obviously.
You should just call it Mayan Kesef, right?
Not quite, not quite.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions. So the first question that I have is, since divorce is a mitzvah, how come we don't have like a sudas mitzvah afterwards or before even?
Such an interesting thing.
Because you would
I
think
think
like you would want to have like some level, it feels like this prescription is very like might leave like a level of unclosure for people. Like, okay, it's anticlimactic.
right. I'll tell you, I want to answer your question, but just before I forget, I want to comment on the last thing. It's funny. I explain the get process to people, and I talk about the fact that, you could decide if you want to be face to face or not. And as I'm sure you can imagine, an extremely common response to that question is, well, what do most people do? I don't know. How am I supposed to know? I don't know. What do other people do? And so what I always tell people is, it's from my understanding, many people feel a unique sense of closure when the get is done face to face. And I'll be honest with you, it happens time and again. It happens time. Thank you for that. Thank you very much. It happens time and again, that we have to be very respectful of the people when they come for a get. Hopefully, we do a good job of it. This is a big moment for them, and it's obviously a sensitive moment for them. We want them to feel comfortable, and we don't want to increase the stress or tension, but we want to be respectful. So many times there are people just sitting and just schmoozing with us, and we kind of I sort of make some very small talk because there's all this time where we're just sitting around. I sort of make some very basic small talk at the beginning, just sort of to feel them out a little bit. And if I get curt responses, then I just leave them alone, but many times we get into very warm discussion. Hopefully, we're putting them at ease. Many times, the couplets themselves are, obviously this varies, but many times they're having, pleasant discussion. They don't hate each other. This is just not working. But even when things are very laid back, it's extremely normal, for that moment when they're standing face to face and the husband is saying something to the wife, and then he places together. It's an extremely powerful moment of closure. Everybody's different. Nothing is true for everybody, but many people find that way. In terms of, I would imagine, the reason why we don't have a Sudas mitzvah is, first of all, it's not like it's incumbent upon people to do a get. It's that if they feel this is the right thing, they go ahead and do it. And it is worthwhile to note there's a famous Gemara also in Maseches Gittin that talks about how the altar sheds tears when people get divorced. Now, I do not think the takeaway from that is that it's the wrong thing to do. I think the takeaway is what I think we can relate to. It's a sad thing that this is what's happening. It could very well be the right thing to do, but it's still a sad thing. It's interesting you post that. One of my colleagues is of the habit of wishing a mazel tov to people when they're done. I'll be honest with you. If that resonates for a person, that's great. I personally don't. I just told them it's been very nice to, if I don't know them, it's been very nice to meet you, and I just best of luck moving forward. To me, that feels like the most appropriate. Yeah.
We did get a question. I thought the Beit Din needs to rip up the original get. I think she meant the
Yes.
ksuba, maybe.
Okay, let me talk about that. Let me talk about that. Actually, thank you for that. Actually, both parts are true. Um, okay, let me first mention the get is defaced after it's done. The reason the get is defaced is because it was written for this specific couple. There's actually a phrase that said a zillion times at the get. That wasn't the technical usage of the word zillion, but lishmo ulishma ulashem gerushin, that this is being done for this, for his sake, for her sake, and for the sake of divorce. This get is only, even if theoretically you had the same names, it would be invalid because it wasn't written for that couple. So we wouldn't want to get to be reused, and we also wouldn't want confusion if the get happened or not. So actually, we still keep it. We still keep it just to, if there was ever a question about it, ever a valid question about it, we still keep it. But we normally cut it in some way so that's clear that it's not intended to be used further. What's the story with the ksuba? So the ksuba is a legal document. Uh, at its core, the ksuba represents the responsibilities of the husband to the wife during the marriage, that he has to provide for her needs, but also once the marriage is over, that he owes her a sum of money. So this is an important document for her to have. Uh, the woman normally, when people get married, the woman holds the ksuba. Many times it's on people's walls when they're married, but theoretically, if it wouldn't be on the wall, it's the woman's private document. I'm sure there are some people on here who are familiar with the woman not even sharing with her husband where the ksuba is
Oh, my
even.
husband doesn't know where it is.
Yeah, I don't know where my ksuba is, but it's now there's plenty of things in my house that I have
Sure,
no
he
idea.
could figure it out because I have an organizational system, but
Yeah. So the thing with defacing the ksuba, actually, it's interesting. Now, the amount of money that the husband owes the wife, if this is her first marriage, there's different opinions as to how much it could be. It could be as much as $40,000. It could be, but understand that in a normal circumstance, all the assets of the marriage that the wife walks away with are normally included in what the husband is providing the wife. So if you imagine people have been married for years, when they split up their assets, the overwhelming majority of the time, she's walking away with more than a value of $40,000 when you think of all the value of the thing. So it's normally understood that she's forgiving the ksuba because she's getting in other words, if you take the ksuba route, then all you get is that $40,000, let's say, nothing else. So it's normally understood that she's forgiving that. If everything has been worked out financially, it does make sense to face the ksuba. Many people think the Beis Din is going to like dramatically rip it in front of them or something like that. Maybe there are Beis Dins who do that. If they give us the ksuba, we just maybe make a mark through one of the witnesses' signatures or something, something of that sort. But if financial arrangements still have not been made, and the wife has any concern about that, at least being able to walk away with something, actually, she shouldn't be defacing her ksuba. She should be holding on to her ksuba.
okay, so that brings me to the next question, which is and I imagine that this depends very much on the jurisdiction in which the couple lives or got married or whatever the scenario is, but how can halacha interact with the civil divorce? And
Yeah,
in that same vein, what do you do to prepare for either one? Like, how do the rabbis interact with the civil aspect? And like, what are you supposed to do like, at what stage is the divorce happening halachically versus civilly?
Yeah, that's an extremely important question, and I'm sure it won't surprise you to hear me say people handle it differently. So first of all, I'll start with when people ask me my personal advice, what I recommend. I recommend once there's clarity that they want to go ahead with the divorce, and it's not like we're trying this or waiting that, or it's really clear. I recommend doing the get sooner rather than later, even if the civil divorce has not yet occurred. There are, I'm sure I don't have to tell you or the audience that there are all kinds of sad stories in Cloud Israel of big complications in getting a get down the road. So if parties are amenable to just going ahead and doing the get, let's just get it out of the way. If nothing else, that it's not this stressful cloud hanging over anybody. Um, and that's fine to go ahead with the get before the civil divorce. Um, at least that's how our basin operates. The one thing that needs to happen before the get occurs, and this is a very concrete delay sometimes for our gets, is in normal circumstances, the couple needs to already be living at different residences. In other words, you can imagine the idea of they just got halachically divorced and then they go home, they go back to the same address doesn't make a lot of sense. Um, so that's the standard thing. Um, Now, on the other hand, I do tell people that if you could imagine, you need two people to have a get. And unfortunately, the dynamic already is these two people are not seeing things eye to eye. If they were seeing things eye to eye, they wouldn't be getting a divorce. So they're already not seeing things eye to eye. You could certainly imagine that they're not necessarily in the same place in terms of timing. I'm sure you could imagine that. So, that being the case, many times one party calls up and says, I'm ready to do a get, and the other party's not agreeable, and what do I do? Um, and the truth is, what I normally tell people is it's reasonable to hold off on the get until the civil divorce is worked out. In other words, it's though I encourage to the contrary, it's not like being uh, it's not considered
Until
like
the
being
assets are divided and the like living situation and the financials are figured out.
right. In other words, it's not crazy for one of the parties to say, by the way, part of it even has to do with what you were talking about with the ksuba before, in terms of like if we have to work things out, let's work things out before the get is done. That's like within the range of quote unquote normal. Do you know what I mean? So that's a good thing for people to realize. I'm sure there are Beis Dins in the world that would say we don't want to do the get until the civil divorce is worked out. I'm sure there are Beis Dins in the world that say that, but my guess is most Beis Dins would have a similar stance to what I just said to you.
Does the Beis Din have mediation available to mediate things like the issue of the ketubah
Okay,
in
so
correlation to the into get giving or receiving a get?
yeah, thank you very much. So I'm sure different Beis Dins handle things differently. Our local Vad HaRabbanim, sort of my place to do these getting is I'm representing the Rabbinical Council of Greater Washington. We have different divisions of our Beis Din. So there's a litigation division. We have, thank God, a Gerus, a conversion Beis Din. We have a divorce Beis Din. Um, if there's some actual dispute that needs to be worked out, that's really a matter for the litigation uh, division, which it's probably just as well that if there is a matter for litigation, it's not necessarily the same people who are going to be involved with the get. In other words, if it was sort of like unpleasant as is, it's not the worst thing in the world that it's a different set of people, that a person could deal with the litigation, and then when they're finally ready for the get, they don't have to see those same people necessarily.
Right.
Um, so that's how we handle it. I should mention the Basin of America. The Basin of America is a very significant body in all kinds of ways. I'm certainly not the Basin of America's representative. People can check this out with the Basin of America themselves if they like. To the best of my knowledge, the policy of the Basin of America is, and they're a very active litigating basin in the country, and people are welcome to contact them from around the country. They see that as their role. But if there's litigation regarding custody, assets, things of that sort, they're happy to deal with it. But their policy is, I believe you can check it for yourself, but their policy is the get needs to be given before we go ahead with the litigation.
Okay,
And that,
so the get needs to come before litigating the ketubah.
right. In other words, or any of these things.
Their
Let's, I didn't hear what?
the Basin of America, not necessarily Basin of Greater Washington.
Right. That's their policy. And, it's probably a very healthy policy.
Okay. So what are some of the, okay, I'm an organizer, so I'm always interested in the practical application of how we can help our friends, or if we're going through it ourselves, how we can advise them. And obviously, if you are not, I'm not saying ever to give advice if you don't know anything about it, but what are some of the misconceptions that people in general have? And how can we mitigate challenges that you might have during the get procedure? And then we can talk about sort of what the greater community can do to help couples who are going through that.
Thank you. Um, yes, I guess what maybe, and thank God this is the this is the minority, definitely the minority of situations. But maybe I'll talk a little bit about preparing for difficult situations where both parties are not ready to do a get, or not interested in doing a get, and that of course is, I think it's a big, it's the big elephant in the room in these discussions, a very important elephant. So I wanted to say two things. This is extremely um, proper and extremely well known, but I just want to say it. Base of America has a document called the halachic prenup. It's a
Great. I love that we're talking about this.
Yeah, I think it's very important. It's a very important thing. Um, when I officiate at marriages, I encourage the parties to do it. Um, I'll explain very briefly because I don't want to take too much time. If you want me to go into it more, just let me know. But the gist of the halachic prenup, I want to clarify. People say the halachic prenup ensures that there'll never be get refusal. That's not an accurate statement. But the halachic prenup makes it much less likely that there be get refusal. Um, and basically, it creates a great deterrent from a husband delaying giving the get once it's clear, once they're living at different residences. So that's a really good thing to do. Um, it's always a little bit of an uncomfortable conversation. The way I say it to couples is I say, listen, you guys seem like a lovely couple. I could never imagine you guys getting divorced, but I could never imagine anybody ever getting divorced when they're getting married. And it happens, divorce happens. So if everybody just has the practice of doing this halachic prenup, then every now and then, when unfortunately something unfortunate happens, we'll all be in a better position. So that's one thing. I should also mention that if a person can do a halachic prenup even after they've gotten married, if I'm not mistaken, the website is theprenup.org.
Yeah.
I think so. But what I do want to clarify is what's so great that the Basin of America has this document is, like many sensitive things in halacha, if it's not done the right way, it could actually create problems with the get. So what's so good, I wouldn't just say just have a prenup. I would say have a prenup from a solid halachic source, and the Basin of America certainly is one of those. That's one thing to keep in mind. So that's before anyone's even talking about divorce. Um,
And I just want to say a shout out to my dad who made both me and my brother do them before we got married. And it had just become a thing when we got married almost 24 years ago next week. It had just sort of become a thing. I believe it came out in 2000 and we got married in 2002. And I think the rabbi was like, I don't know what this is, but it was because it was really new.
right.
And even though I did have a fight with my dad about it, he was very, very insistent because the same thing that you just said, which was, "Well, we love each other. Why would this ever?" But I feel like parents especially need to enforce this with their kids because A, even if your kids are old enough to get married, uh, that doesn't mean you stop being a parent. And B, like they don't know how hard it is to be married, and or that it is a conviction to be married every single day, and you have to go into each day being like, I want to be married. And the second you stop doing that, it becomes a problem. And I think that people who are just starting out don't always realize that. And I feel like it is incumbent upon the community in general to encourage this. And I think that it's super important. So just saying, shout out to my dad for being a early adopter.
Thank you. And I just want to point out that now your father has recorded that you said he was right about
Yes.
something.
I
That's
wrote it in my email last week. He saw it already, but
okay, great. No, but I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, and I think it is very important. Yeah.
so
Um,
since we're also discussing it, I guess my question is why don't we just change the ketubah to include the halachic prenup, and then we can avoid needing it all together? Why the addition of the document?
okay, so that's a really interesting question. I should say, first of all, I should say, like any good halachic discussion, not all rabbis today are necessarily into the halachic prenup. I'm just putting it out there. I am, but just full disclosure. Um, that's one thing. The other thing is actually the way the halachic prenup works is as a companion to the ksuba. And so let me explain that real briefly. I mentioned before that I mentioned before that part of the ksuba is the husband obligates himself to take care of the wife's needs during the course of the marriage. So, okay, so that means that if there's a grocery bill to pay, if there's rent to pay, if there's utilities to pay, technically speaking, that's the husband's department. That's now if the wife if the wife earns more than the husband, that's between the husband and wife. But a wife has a right to turn to the husband and say, "You really need to be taking care of this stuff." That's part of what's in the ksuba. Let's say, heaven forbid, the husband and wife are no longer living together. Let's say there has not been a get that took place yet, but the husband and wife are no longer living together. So the ksuba says that he's obligated to take care of her needs. How much is that? I don't know. I don't know. Try to figure out how much of the grocery bill from last week was specifically for my wife. I don't know. So what the prenup does is the prenup monetizes that. And the prenup says that if at any point in time the husband and wife are not living under the same roof, I think maybe it's $150 a day. It's a significant amount that it puts in there. I don't remember. You can check it out online. Um, but it monetizes it. So what it's really doing, this is what I was alluding to a little bit before. If you start putting penalties on the husband for not giving a get, it could be that it makes it not even valid once the get happens. It's a little bit complicated. What this is doing is this is working with a document that the husband agreed to at the time of marriage, and it's just monetizing what he already agreed to. So that's actually how the prenup is working. I don't know
And
if I
it's
answered.
enforceable in civil court.
Great. Thank you for raising that. So the way it's written is it should be enforceable in civil court. Um, they normally recommend that a person has the prenup notarized. I'll tell you also, I don't hold myself as an expert in this, but I've heard people who are far more experienced than I in this regard who have said that even though it's a very good thing for an officiating rabbi to have the couple do halachic prenup, if you're kind of sticking it in front of the people 5 minutes before the chuppah and say, just sign this, it's not the best thing in the world because it could be that a person can make an argument in civil court. I didn't even know what I was signing. So yes, but part of the part of the presentation of the prenup is intended that it should be enforceable in civil court.
Okay. So,
But I should say, sorry, I should say that the correct order of operations would
I
be
love
to
order of
go to
operations.
would be to go to a Beis Din on that issue, and that the Beis Din would hopefully recognize, the prenup, and then the Beis Din would paskin that the person should be paying whatever, and then if he wouldn't agree, Beis Din could give the couple the option to go to civil court if the person wasn't agreeing with the psak of the Beis Din. But that's probably a lengthier discussion than you have time for.
Okay, so what do you wish then? So first of all, we should say that we're hoping that Rabbanim are counseling younger or new or premarital couples in terms of marriage in general, but encouraging them earlier on before the chuppah to have a prenuptial agreement. But what do you wish uh, all young couples or any couple really knew before they jumped in so that they could make good decisions, and try to avoid doing this mitzvah?
Yeah. So I can't say I'm some great expert on this. I'll just tell you more and more, and I see all kinds of couples, so nobody should assume that I'm talking about them. I don't know, who's going to watch this, but I don't know what I'm finding more and more is I think it's really important for people to know themselves before they're getting married. Um, I think there's a great emphasis today on making sure one knows about the other person, which is, of course, extremely, extremely important. But I don't know. I don't mean to start getting on a soapbox, but I think the more we're cutting down on in-person communication in all kinds of ways in our society, um, I think people are getting less and less of a sense of their own understanding of self and their own understanding of self when they're interacting with another person. Uh, I wish that was an easy thing to work on, but I don't know. My theory is that's my theory. There's so many ways parents can be helping their children as they embark upon this point of life, but actually, I really think that the more self-confidence and self-awareness that we can empower our children with could be a great thing. I know that's a little bit off topic, but to
No,
me,
it's
that's
not. I think it's important. Like I said, I don't think that we ever stop being parents. Doesn't matter
right,
how old. So we just have to encourage our kids, even when they're,
right.
like just because they're 18 doesn't mean they know all the things.
I
Um,
also, I also, if I may, I want to give a little bit of general advice for people's awareness. Unfortunately, if they're already in the point where they are talking about a divorce, um, one practical, more sort of outlook. Um, there are extreme situations, um, and I'm sure you and so many others have been aware of different kinds of rallies and very dramatic, very public. And sometimes that's what needs to be done. Sometimes that really is what needs to be done. The only thing I'll tell people, and I am not saying this for the sake of the get refuser, I'm actually saying this for the sake of the get refusee. Once you raise the temperature, it's very hard to lower the temperature. So I'm not saying that that shouldn't ever be done. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is my advice to people always is let's go slow. In other words, people's very commonly people feel like if we can't come to immediate agreement, I'm gonna hit them with everything I've got. It could be being a little bit accommodating on an area, not saying a person has to be accommodating, but it could be being a little bit accommodating might end up being to one's own benefit down the road. Every situation is different. I'm just putting it out there. The other very, very concrete thing that I want to mention is even if people don't have a halachic prenup, a very good piece of information to have in mind is divorce settlements are extremely common. Civil divorce settlements are extremely common. People are getting divorced. And basic advice is, and it might make sense to have an attorney contact whatever beis din you would be dealing with, but basic advice is to make the get part of the divorce settlement. And so many headaches that people agonize about, rightfully so, are solved by just making that part of the divorce settlement. That is not a cure-all, not by any stretch, but it resolves a lot of stress that people sometimes might be able to avoid if they made it part of the divorce settlement.
okay. So as a community, what can we do to support people who are there any specific halachot that the community is supposed to do when people are, I'm not talking about a get refuser yet. I'm talking about what is the community supposed to do? Because it's so often like I choose him, I choose her, right? Like how do you as the bystander navigate that in a way that shows support? And then on the same vein, what are we supposed to do as a community when someone says, I'm not giving a get? Either on either side.
Right, right. Thank you. Okay. I want to just share a really brief story. There was once a simcha in my shul and the parents were in the process of a divorce at the time. And unfortunately, that's not an uncommon thing in my shul or in any shul. And like I'm sure all rabbis do, I just sort of had to be very conscientious about being very even. And thank God both parents are wonderful people. And I just made sure to say nice things about both parents but I had to be even more thoughtful than, let's say, in an average situation about being very balanced. And one of the parents contacted me after the simcha, and they said something I was so moved by it. They said they really are very grateful because they felt I sent a message to the community. I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "Because the message that you sent was both of us are good people and 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 it's okay to be nice and kind to both of us. And it doesn't have to be that one of us is good and one of us is bad." Um, so I just wanted to share it because I think that's elementary. My guess is most of us think that's elementary. But what I want to share is that the person in it felt like that was such a powerful statement. So the fact that someone would say that to me, I think speaks to how we have to be so sensitive, so over, obviously my position in community is a little bit different than most, but sure, it's obvious the value of having people in the process of divorce over and things like that, hosting and things like that. I try to be very even. Let's say if both parties live in the community, I try to be very thoughtful. If I invite one over, um, I try to invite the other one over in relatively close proximity. Especially if there are kids in the mix. It shouldn't be that like the kids, oh, Rosenbaums always have this one over and they never have you over and what. But I just think, and to be very thoughtful about that, and that we don't have to be judges. It's not our responsibility to be judges. You know what mitzvah it is? V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your fellow like yourself. And in 9.5 times out of 10, they're both good people and it's not working anymore. And let me be warm to both of them. Um, and I think I think if we start taking sides, that becomes very complicated. And I think to be nice to both parties should not be viewed as taking sides. To discuss the nitty gritty with either party and to start, and sometimes a friend really needs us and we have to really go through the nitty gritty with them. And that's sometimes part of being a good, close friend. Just the average person on the street, just be nice to both parties and make sure it's clear you're being nice to both parties. I think that's very significant. Um, there are extreme situations where there's one person who's clearly doing the wrong thing. Um, I think it's really important that there should be a process in terms of reaching that decision. I obviously have a bias on this one, but my view is it's important. We live in a world that one person posts something on social media and all of a sudden it's fact. And you know something? I think we can all think of situations that we're aware of that have been terribly inflated by very well-meaning people, very well-meaning people. So I'm a big believer that the community should not be taking sides until there's some mode by which each party has an opportunity to share their perspective. So if someone feels that the get is being unjustly refused, to contact the Beis Din, let the Beis Din contact the other party. If at that point the party refuses to participate in Beis Din, they were given the opportunity to have their day in court and they declined. So now let the Beis Din write a message to the community saying this person is not even participating in the process of even ascertaining what's right and wrong. And so now, if at that point the Beis Din, the communal Beis Din, or the national Beis Din, whatever it says, should pressure the person. So that's a little bit ask your local rabbi, what does that mean in this situation? But it's worthwhile to connect at that point. But I would just wait until I think it's really important on a communal level that there be some kind of formal process to make that decision. Because if not, it's just the stampede, and the stampede isn't. Many times the stampede is correct. Probably most times the stampede is correct. But sometimes the stampede is incorrect, and sometimes even if the stampede is correct, the facts actually have become inflated through the game of telephone, and that's also unfortunate. Yeah.
Understood. As we wrap up here, is there anything else you think people in the divorce process or the community or young couples or anything that we didn't cover that you think people should know?
I don't think so. I think this is a really good discussion. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. If I could just emphasize one more time, just even as just people, friends, relatives, the more we can in our own heart of hearts believe that two very fine people can get divorced, the more we actually internalize that, the better we can help various people in our lives because it's a very painful thing, and we don't need to add to that pain. They have enough pain without our well-meaning but a little bit confused perspectives sometimes.
Okay, amazing. I'll just read one of the comments because I think it's important from a jurisdiction perspective. Was that Abigail wrote that in Israel, the Beis Din is reluctant to give a get before an agreement is reached regarding child support.
Okay.
Is that something that American Bate Din also focus on?
I I bet I bet there are Batei Din in America that do something similar to that or that exactly. I bet. Again, I know how our Din works. I know how the Basin of America works. Honestly, don't know that much about other Batei Din, to be candid with you.
Okay, but that's not necessarily a thing in Based in America or in Washington.
Not here, and I don't believe it's the case of Basin of America.
Okay, but that's something that could go into like the civil in the marriage settlement as well and be packaged all as one, which would allow the
Right.
base also.
I should mention super fast. If you look at the halachic prenup, there's something that it's a really smart thing. They don't make it obligatory for the halachic prenup, but there is something that um, there's a way to um, uh, have on record what Beis Din would decide matters in terms of custody and division of assets and things like that. It's actually for people who don't deal with it in civil court, for people who deal with it in Beis Din, it's a whole headache in its own right, even agreeing
I
on
mean,
what
how to
Beis
choose the
Din
based
is.
in the first place?
Yes, yes, it's a big, and it's more than a headache. It sometimes really makes a difference in terms of getting to actual clear and practical closure, and it's unfortunately one of the very complicated things of the get process of the divorce process. So it's not a bad thing. But if people are sort of uncomfortable with the whole thing and they just want to do the basic halachic prenup, you can sign the general halachic prenup without signing that specific clause in the halachic prenup.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you very
I
much.
really appreciate it. And I think, I mean, I certainly learned a lot today, and I hope I never have to use anything you just taught me.
Um, Amen. Amen.
uh,
And it should be a schus for your mother's neshama. An honor to participate.
I mean, thank you so
Thank you very
much.
much.
And if you are, if anybody has any questions, how can people reach out to you and speak to you, or how can they get in contact with the Beit Din if they want to?
Oh, so I have to confess, I'm a little bit, as you can testify, sometimes it's hard to get a hold of me. Like I have to put my primary responsibility on my show members. If people live in the Washington area and they want to get involved in a get, if you go to the VOD's website, Rabbinical Council of Greater Washington, there's a website, way to contact us for divorce. If you don't live in the Washington area, you're probably better off contacting the Beis Din of America. Um, um, if people have general questions that they want to discuss, you're welcome to email me. But I have to be honest, as many people on this can attest, I sometimes get to them. I sometimes don't get to them. I'm embarrassed to say it. If you're not a
No, you're
member of
pretty
my
fast.
shul, that's not my. And my email address is rdrosenbaum@yise.org.
Okay. Thank you so much. Of course, um, if you have any questions, I'm also happy to pass them on to the rabbi if anybody wants to contact me directly, Rebekah@RebekahSalton.com. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I think this would have made my mom really happy, and I appreciate that you're all here joining us live, or if you're watching this on the replay, thank you so much for watching it on the replay, and I'm wishing you all a beautiful week, and again, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Be well.